they're talking about the prophetic way and model of integration. And again, we can all learn something from that. About how the Prophet ﷺ, peace be upon him, when he traveled from Mecca to Medina, from his birthplace to the city in which now he resides, how that transformation took place and how he bonded the migrants with the helpers. I envy sightless trees that gaze upon his form completely dazed, not knowing if the sun had risen, but felt themselves in unison with those who prayed and fasted too, simply because he told them to, with truth and kindness, charity, from God who gave such clarity. His mercy comes in one he sent, to mold our hearts for heaven bent. And with these words, I'd like to welcome our next speaker for the evening, Imam Irfan Chishti, who needs little introduction to this community as he is somebody who's been brought up amongst it. But just a little bit about him, he studied at Jamia al-Qalam in Nottingham and the Sheikh in Dar and travelled to Egypt to further his Islamic studies. He's also a qualified secondary school teacher, as well as fulfilling his duties by being a prison imam, serving the inmates at Rochdale. For this current man, he's also the Muslim chaplain for the borough as well. And in the Queen's New Year's Honours list, Imam Irfan was awarded an MBE for his services to the Muslim people. Please welcome Imam Irfan Chishti.
Allah's name I begin with, the most merciful, the most kind. All praise is due to the Almighty. We send our salutations, praise and blessings upon the noble and final Prophet Muhammad. Peace and blessings be upon him. First and foremost, can I just say, as one of the host speakers, one of the two host speakers, apologies for the schedule. Those of you who've got the program, you will see that we're running on PMT, not on GMT. Which I'd like to say is Pakistani time on, which we've read a few times. So apologies for that, but hopefully we'll speed it up a little bit. I want to say to the Mayor of Parker that this is one of the few occasions that I've actually prepared written out a speech, but I will still try and cut it short because of the time. Our chief guests have arrived, we are a little late, so we'll go straight into the topic. Start with the recitation of the Holy Quran. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم من أجل ذلك كتبنا على بني إسرائيل أنه من قتل نفسا بغير نفس أو فساد في الأرض فكأنما قتل الناس جميعا ومن أحياها فكأنما أحيا الناس جميعا صدق الله العظيم. The topic that I've been given is on the sanctity of life. Life is the very basic right of any living organ. Certainly the right of any human being, a gift from the Almighty. And therefore we know from this that human blood and life is absolutely sacred. Islam condemns killing, violation, abuse of power and terrorism in all its forms. Killing the soul without reason is totally condemned by the Quran and is equated to the killing of the entire mankind. In fact, I would say that it is a manifestation of the dignity of man that Islam has placed infinite value on human life, as expressed in this verse that I just recited. Because of that, we ordained for the children of Israel that if anyone killed a person, not in retaliation of murder or to spread mischief in the land, it would be as if he killed all of mankind. And if anyone saves a life, it would be as if he saved the life of the entire mankind. Chapter 5, verse 32. The reference here to the children of Israel, my Christian colleagues in particular will perhaps have heard that and taken note of that. That is the Jewish people at the time. This reference to the Bani Israel, the people of Israel, represents the continuity of the basic values that are common to all revealed religions. river or a London, life, regardless of belief, is sacred. The value that is advocated is holistic and indivisible in that aggression against one is tantamount to aggression against all. Life is not only of infinite value, it is also extremely sacred. The Quran, chapter 17, verse 33 says, "Do not kill anyone whose killing Allah has forbidden, except for a just cause." Very notable and erudite scholar Imam has quoted these verses, and he draws the following conclusion. In respect of the sanctity of life and the prohibition of aggression against it, Muslims and non-Muslims are all equal. Attack on the personal safety of non-Muslims invokes the same punishment in this world and the hereafter. Now, the verse that I just recited before talks about just cause. And this is perhaps, our previous speaker said that we're not here to kind of talk about how things are misunderstood, but I think certainly with this word that I'm going to now talk about, there are certain misunderstandings, certainly some misreadings. If I was to ask you about the word jihad, and ask you what perception, what images come into your mind, and I've done this lecture before in schools in a mini version, my prophet put up a picture of our friend Mr. Osama bin Laden, a proponent of his so-called jihad. And I've just asked the children to tell me what comes to your mind as soon as you see this person. And of course, it's derogatory. For a person to have an image of the face that looks outwardly Muslim and then not to purport to the adherents and to the tenets of Islam is extremely damaging to the face of Islam. But if you as individuals wanted to go and research that, where would you go and look? A dictionary? Now for English? Or perhaps these days you go on to Google and ask Sheikh Google what his perception of jihad was. And I did that just before while I was writing this speech. The term jihad, Wikipedia, right, which is the most common kind of internet encyclopedia that's used. The term jihad, used without any qualifiers, is generally understood in the West to be referring to holy war on behalf of Islam. That's the first sentence of the extract from Wikipedia on this word jihad. So if that's what people are accessing to have a better understanding of the term, then it's not surprising that people have a limited understanding of this very, very noble, very, very broad, multifaceted concept of jihad, which I'm going to try and invite you all with, and hopefully myself in the process. Now, without going into too much debate and too much controversy, for that's not what we're here to do. We're here to honour and celebrate the life and the birth of the Blessed Prophet. But let me just give you, if I can, a few very solid facts. First and foremost, as our previous speaker mentioned, the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings, lived on this planet physically for 63 years. 40 of them he lived without proclaiming his prophethood. And 23 of those he lived as a prophet. The first 10 years of his life he lived in a city called Mecca, which is where the Kaaba is a point of direction for prayer. 10 years in this land, 10 years in a state of hostility, 10 years in a state of aggression, 10 years in a state of animosity between people, tensions, we heard before about community cohesion. Islam came and did unite all of those warring factions. But 10 years of hostility and not one single murder or killing in this way, in this concept of jihad that some people try to propose. 10 years of no war. And yet still there were verses revealed during that 10-year time which did contain the word jihad. Jahidhum, go and make this jihad. So hang on a minute. 10 years of non-violence, and yet there are verses being revealed in Makkah which talk about jihad. Surely it begs the question, what type of jihad, what kind of jihad is God Almighty asking for those people to get themselves involved with? And I would argue, I'm that period of time where there wasn't an open instruction to go and defend people, the honour of life and property, the concept of jihad was opened up to be much, much more greater. We have an understanding of a lesser and a greater jihad. Very famous battle, the companions of this returned back, and the Prophet of God, Muhammad, turned around and said to his companions, well done, we've just completed the lesser jihad, this physical warfare, now let's prepare for a greater jihad. And by that he meant the greater struggle against the self. The struggle against the self to continue to do right, the struggle against the self to continue to be on the side of justice. And I've just got a list here of various different multi-facets of jihad that the Prophet himself described. In a very, very powerful and very authentic narration, a young companion, a young follower, disciple of the Prophet Muhammad came and sought permission from the Prophet to go out into the battlefield and to fight with the troops. The Prophet of Allah returned with a reply, returned his request with a question. Do you have parents? Do you have parents at home that need looking after? And he said, yes, I have parents that need looking after. He said, go serve your parents, in that is your jihad. Seeking knowledge, going out on the path of bettering yourself so that you can help to better others, that is described as a path of jihad. Propagation of the truth is described as jihad. Standing up for justice is described as jihad. Speaking up against unfair and unjust rulers is described as jihad. Earning a lawful livelihood. I'm sure my next speaker is going to be speaking a little bit about that. Earning a lawful livelihood is also described as jihad. And yes, military, and I repeat, military engagement is also described as jihad. But there is the breadth of it. In terms of military engagement, though, warriors are under a personal and a religious duty not to engage in battle with civilian life. It is consequently unlawful to attack women and children, the elderly, the insane, the ill, and the invalid. And this includes all different types of people who have disabilities should not be harmed in any way, shape, or form. Also, exempted categories include priests, monks, religious folk, people of religion, buildings of religion are also included in those exemptions that should not be attacked in physical warfare. But not just buildings, plantations, trees, crops that are there for the public good, buildings that are there for the public good are buildings that should be avoided in warfare. Now these are some of the detailed conditions of this aspect of jihad, and as I say, this very aspect of jihad. And if we just compare that, without going into too much controversy and politics, if you compare that to the blanket bombings that we've seen in recent years, then really we've got something all of us to think about. The next point, a very important one, about contextualization. The Quran, just like any other religious narration, can always be taken out of context. I did have a quotation here from Jesus Christ, and I've got one here from Winston Churchill. I'll just suffice with the one from Winston Churchill. May the 13th, 1914, the House of Commons, Winston Churchill says, I have nothing to offer but blood, toil, tears and sweat. You ask what is our policy, the British government's policy. I will say it is to wage war by sea, land and air, with all our might. You ask what is our aim, I can answer in one word, victory. Victory at all costs. Victory, however long and hard the road may be. 1940, Winston Churchill. If anyone read that and took it as it stood, what impression would it leave you in your minds about our friend Winston Churchill? Someone who is a proponent of violence, someone who's instilling hatred and fear in other people, somebody like that, somebody like me, or anybody else said that in this day, and he'd probably have to be arrested. But no, he was saying it in the context of war. He was speaking as he was Britain was declaring war against Germany. So we have a certain understanding of what he's saying has a more precise meaning in exactly the same way. Those verses that look outwardly to be instilling in people this bloodthirsty, as some people say. Our friend Gilbert from Holland recently said things like that about the Quran. And what he's done is exactly the example that I've done here, taking things totally out of context without conversation, without a look at the wider meaning of the verse. Lastly, and I know previous speakers touched upon this briefly, so I'll just skim over that. Again, when we're talking about this aspect of warfare, we have to ask ourselves the question: warfare can be of two types, offensive or defensive, and it's absolutely categorical in Islam that the only form of warfare which governments and battle and warring armies are allowed to engage with are defensive. Now, let me move you to something which certainly every time I read this verse very much moves me. I am pleased to see that we have some of our sisters and our ladies amongst the audience. We would have liked to have seen more, but that's certainly something that the conference organisers think about. But this verse, which I'm about to recite, is something which I think is at the heart of Islam, which people need to be reminded much more about. Recently, God has blessed me with another daughter. I've got two young daughters now. And when I think about this aspect of what pre-Islam, pre-Muhammad Arabia was like, and I look to my own daughters at home, those of you who are mothers and fathers, think about this. وَإِذَا الْمَوْءُودَةُ سُئِلَتْ وَإِذَا الْمَوْءُودَةُ سُئِلَتْ بِأَيِّ ذَنْبٍ قُتِلَتْ. This verse is describing the practice of child infanticide that was commonplace in Arabia. Commonplace. And in particular, female child infanticide. A female was born, and the father would at the same time be preparing the grave so that he could bury his own daughter alive. And the Quran asks a question on behalf of that unborn child, that child that was killed for the only reason that it happened to be born with a certain gender. What crime did it kill, or did it commit, that it deserved this punishment of death? That to me sums up the importance of the sanctity of life in Islam. Of all life, regardless of gender, regardless of creed, regardless of colour, regardless of status. The last sermon, we heard it just briefly from my previous speaker, the Prophet Muhammad says, your lives and property are forbidden to one another until you meet your Lord on the day of resurrection. Sacred is your life and property. I'm going to leave you with glimpses of a certain different direction and take a leave. When we talk about sanctity of life, normally we talk about the sanctity of human life. But you've heard from our previous speakers already that the Prophet of God, Muhammad, peace and blessings and be upon him, was a prophet who was a mercy to, I would translate the verse as being mercy to the entire creation. Alamin in the Arabic is the plural of world. All of the worlds and what is contained in it. Just two examples of how the Prophet of Allah, not only did he honour the sanctity of human life, but he also honoured the sanctity of animal life. And certainly in the country that we live in, the culture that we have in the British community, I still haven't got my head around this concept of loyalty, of the loyalty of the dog. Those who keep dogs as pets tell me that it's absolutely incredible how loyal they are. And perhaps as Muslims, we might need to revisit some of this earlier scripture. There is not an animal on earth, nor a being that flies on its wings, but forms parts of communities like you. This is a verse, chapter 6, verse 38. What does that show? That animals in their kingdom is also a community that also deserves your love and respect. His mercy, Prophet Muhammad's mercy and compassion is so deep that even animals, even plants would benefit from his existence as their guardian. One day, he told his companions the story of two women, and this is a beautiful story, and I think I'm going to have to finish with this. A prostitute was guided by God's truth and ultimately went to paradise because she gave water to a dog dying of thirst in the desert. Water to a dog that was dying of thirst, and God accepted her in His kingdom. Allah's apostle said a woman was tortured and was put into hell because of a cat that she had kept locked till it died of hunger. And then Allah's apostle further says, Allah said to the woman, God says to this woman, you neither fed it nor watered it when you locked it up, nor did you set it free to eat. This is narrated in the chapter in the book of Bukhari, volume 3, book 14, number 553. Authentic narration from the words of the blessed Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. Those two examples, I think, are enough for us to think about. That when we talk about the sanctity of life in Islam, the Prophet of God never limited his mercy and his kindness and his love to human beings. Sadly, he didn't limit it to just Muslims alone. We've heard that so many times. It was all-encompassing to all of God's creation. And as we've heard at the end there, it in fact encompassed the animal kingdom as well. Thank you so much for listening to my words. I hope that you've at least learned something from it. Finally, if I can just say that we have also produced some articles that are some of them will be sent on your tables.